Hello, it is March, which means it is the month of the Irish Readathon. I will leave linked in the description all of the creators, hosts of the Irish Readathon if you want to go and check them out. But that makes it the perfect month to talk about some of my favourite Irish authors so that you can join in with the Readathon. There are a lot of great and really successful Irish authors, and I am actually working on a video about why that might be. But today I'm going to give you 10 of my favourite books by Irish authors and one honorary mention. These are in no particular order, but I am starting with The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. This was nominated for the Booker Prize shortlist and was my favourite book that I read that year. It is kind of a family saga, although not over an extended period of time. It tells the story of a well-to-do Irish family from outside of Dublin who are going through some financial difficulties after the Celtic Tiger crash. It is told from the perspective of each of the members of this family: the father, the mother, the daughter and the son. It explores the lives of each of them, the things that they are hiding from one another, their secrets in the past and their secrets in the present. We have a father who is dealing with this financial crisis without telling his family, and the stress and pressure of that, as well as other secrets he has in his life. The mother, who is really incredibly well written, and her sort of stream of consciousness tells a lot more about the history of her and her relationship with her husband. We have the daughter, who is studying for her leaving cert and in a kind of aggressively erotically charged friendship with one of her best friends, and the son, who is 12 years old, who is really into online gaming. Quite dark and emotional and powerful, but at the same time very, very funny. It has a very dark, dry wit, is very, very propulsive and compelling. There are moments when you can't stop turning the pages even though you want to. And it is written in a really interesting style. Each of the different voices are written differently. In the young daughters, there is a lot of use of text. The mother as well, her perspective is really well written. Paul Murray can really write women. It's, I think, a book that has something for everyone, being very dramatic, very funny, very dark, very thrilling. I think there are secrets to be uncovered and moments of history, and I think definitely a great one, I think, for anyone to read. Next we have one of the most famous Irish writers of the moment, Sally Rooney, with her novel Intermezzo. This book came out in 2024, and I think it's my favourite Rooney, but I might have to reread some to make that decision. This tells the story of Peter and Ivan, who are two brothers with more than a decade in age difference, who have recently lost their brother. Peter is in his 30s, he is a lawyer, and he is like a very type A high stress person who is dealing with the loss of his father and with a high pressure job and with his relationships with two different women. One, his college sweetheart, who broke up with him after an accident, and one, a woman who is quite a lot younger than him. She's 24, and who is dealing with housing issues, with unsecure housing, and also is involved in sex work to a certain extent, like OnlyFans type sex work. And then the younger brother, Ivan, was a chess prodigy, and he's still very good, but he has not made it to the level that he wishes he had, and is again feeling unmoored and uncertain of his place in the world in his early 20s. He goes off to do this sort of chess display where he plays like loads of people all at the same time, and there he meets a woman who is in her early 30s, and that relationship is explored. And as always with Sally Rooney, there are issues of class and money and power dynamics within relationships, and the way the interpersonal dependencies. They are written, it goes back and forth between the perspectives of each of the brothers, and while Ivan is much more close to Sally Rooney's normal style, Peter is a much more disjointed and short, sharp sentences that I think really get into that anxious, tense, controlled mindset that Peter has as a character. I did make a whole video about Sally Rooney, so you can go and check that out if you are interested, but I found this book to be the most cohesive of her books. It is doing something different to some of her other books. It is interesting the way that she is writing and the themes that she is exploring, which are similar across a lot of her books, that like rural-urban divide and power dynamics, as I said. but at the same time, I feel like this is a more mature work, and I really enjoyed it. Next we have The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. I've read a few Emma Donoghue, but this is the only one I've really loved, but it is a really great book. This is a pretty short historical fiction set in 1918 during the flu epidemic. We have Nurse Powers, who works on a maternity ward in this hospital, but because of the flu epidemic, she has been put on a very small ward in kind of a supply closet with 3 women who are in labour and have the flu at the same time, so they can't be put in the normal labour ward. And she is given a skivvy who has never worked in a hospital ever before, and she is also living with her brother who was in the First World War and is suffering PTSD because of that. And it is set over the course of 3 days. It is really, really rapid, really immersive, and really well described. You really feel for the people in the situation, and you really can see the situation. It touches on things like the 1916 Easter Rising and the rising nationalism in Ireland at the time, and also it deals with the violence of the medical system and its treatment of women, things like the Magdalen laundries and the mother and baby homes, the treatment of mothers, unwed mothers, and mothers in general, and the sexism of the Irish state in the 20th century. It goes into really gross detail about birth and about some of the more violent aspects of birth in 1918, particularly in Ireland. And I think it's a really emotional read, a really beautiful, sad, moving read. If that's something you would be interested in. It's really fast paced, again, as I said, as it is spread over only 3 days. There are moments of real wonder and joy, and also moments of real sadness and anger in this book, and I think it is a very powerful one. Next we have The Magician by Colm Toibin. I definitely need to read more Colm Toibin. I have really enjoyed his writing so far. He is much more of a stripped back writer than some of the other people I've mentioned so far. His writing is so simple and yet so evocative. The Magician tells the story of Thomas Mann, who is one of the great classic German writers, and this story follows him from his childhood in the late 19th century through over the course of the First and Second World War. He marries a Jewish woman, and his relationship with her, and then needing to leave Germany in the 1930s under the Nazi government. He is an artist, his children are artists, his wife is an artist, I believe, as well, and so they have this really uncomfortable, complex, kooky family dynamics. There's a lot of mental health issues, drug addiction, obsession with health. They go to a sanatorium in Switzerland, which I believe the Something Mountain, his book, was based off of their experience going here. And he is not he's also a closeted gay man. And so his experience of being alive at that time, and of coming of age before Weimar Germany, and his children's relationship with their own sexuality, and his missing that. But it is a really complex man. He is not likeable. None of these characters are likeable. But the way that Colm Toibin evokes them, they just feel so real. I kind of love quirky, disconnected, unusual families. People who don't really like each other but are related to one another is something that I do enjoy in books, and I think this one's a great example of it. The way that it touches on literature and art in a way that doesn't feel too pretentious or overwhelming if you're not an art person, in the way I would not describe myself as an art person, really. But I think that Colm Toibin's really simple, clear, concise prose is really wonderful, and he has, again, a sense of humour, but it's kind of more subtle, more underlying, kind of a slight wry sense of humour that I think comes out in both of the novels of his I've read, but this one specifically. Are you going to just make mouth noises my whole video? Another doyen of the Irish literary scene, we have The Woman Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle. I think Roddy Doyle is more famous for his more comedic books, such as The Commitments and Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha. I've not read either of them, so I can only comment on this one, but I really, really enjoyed it. This is set from 2021 to 2023 about a woman who had, in some of Roddy Doyle's previous books, been in an abusive relationship. I have not read the previous ones, but they kind of stand alone. It's a loose, connected series rather than one where you have to read them to understand. And so she is now living alone and experiencing what it is like to live alone, and also being sober, and her experience of that as someone who had addiction issues. The story begins on the day she goes to get her COVID vaccine, but the real inciting incident of the story, the reason she started to tell you this story in a way, is because her daughter has turned up on her doorstep saying she's leaving her husband and like doesn't want to talk to them, doesn't want to talk to her children. And over the course of the novel, we slowly uncover why and what has happened in the immediate past, but also in the more distant past. The relationship between this mother and daughter, growing up with an abusive father, and how that affects your relationship with your mother, particularly when your mother is an addict. And so there's like neglect, and it's a really complicated emotional relationship. Again, this is an Irish man who writes women really, really well. I really enjoyed that aspect of this writing. I thought that he brought to life such a realistic character. She's a woman that reminds me of a lot of the women I know who are in their 60s. So she feels really vibrant. She's very straightforward, very honest, but has such a complicated past. And she's also really funny. Again, it has that dark, witty, dry sense of humour that people associate with Irish humour. And it's definitely true here. I think it is the matching of that sense of humour and that like spiralling storytelling that I think really works. It's quite stream of consciousness, particularly when she has COVID and has a fever, but the way that it moves through her thoughts and things are loosely connected, and we pick up so gently and so deftly, we pick up the past. It's not like info dumping at all. Moments come in and everything kind of slowly pieces together the puzzle, and I think it's done really gently and beautifully. One now from the north of Ireland, we have Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This was another of my favourite books of last year, and this is about a woman who is a teacher. It is the 70s in a small town just outside of Belfast that is supposed to be an integrated town, but obviously is not really. And this girl, her father owned a pub, but he has died, and now her brother works in the pub. She is a teacher, but she sometimes does shifts in the pub. And the pub, although they are Catholic, the pub is frequented mostly by Protestants. And she gets into a relationship with a much older Protestant man, which is an affair. He is married. It is her. She lives at home with her mother, who, again, they have a complicated relationship, and there is a lot of love there, but also a lot of trauma in the past and a lot of friction between them, a lot of she is much more modern and her mother is much more set in the past. Her relationships with the children that she works with, she's a primary school teacher, so her kids in her class are like 7, 8 years old. The experience of these like poor young people, poor children, like one of her pupils is the only Catholic in a Protestant housing estate, and so they like can't even leave their clothes outside because people throw dog shit at them. And it's so moving, and again it is funny and dry and really kind of very emotional and very moving. And I would say that the main relationship goes exactly how you were expecting, but around that and outside of that there is elements that are just so human and so touching. The like little moments of the Troubles and what it is like to just live as a person not intimately involved in the Troubles is really well evoked, and I really, really enjoyed reading it. Next we have The Island Child by Molly Aitken. This is another piece of historical fiction, this time set on a small island off the coast of the west coast of Ireland, about this young girl who is born in this very small religious community. And it is told then and also several decades in the future when she is living in Canada, and we kind of slowly uncover why it was she felt she had to leave this community. Her relationships with the children in this community and also with her mother. Her father and brother are fishermen. And the changing nature of this island in the 1950s, this kind of late coming of modernization, and the stronghold of the Catholic Church, particularly a very mystical kind of Catholicism that has a tight grip in this community, and the lack of freedoms available for women. It is a very melancholy book. It doesn't have the humour that some of these other books have, but it is very atmospheric, and the setting of this tiny island town and also this big like city in Canada, I think are what I really enjoyed the most about this book. The community and the bringing in of that mysticism element that is present in both the Catholicism of our main character's mother and the more indigenous Irish tradition. Like, not the Catholicism's been in Ireland for like 2,000 years, but the wee folk and the more sort of mythological element of beliefs that are still present, particularly among the fishermen in this island, and the way that they grow this young person's mind, her conceptions of what is real, and how that relationship reacts. There is a woman, an English woman, who lives on this island with her young son, and their kind of isolation, this othering of people, is also a big part of the novel. As I said, it is just very evocative and moving, and I really enjoyed the atmosphere of this one. Next, a tiny one that I know everyone loves is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is set in a small town over the course of Christmas, and we follow one man as he delivers peat. I believe he delivers peat, maybe coal. He delivers fire-producing energy things to households around this community, and he's well known, he has children, and it's about his like buying things for his family, but also the secrets that this town keeps. On his trips round to the nunnery and things, he sees things that he shouldn't have seen, and it is about the way that those things were swept under the rug of Irish history. If you know anything about the Magdalene laundries, this is the story that we are being told. Again, as seems to be common in a lot of these books, things are told obliquely. So rather than, there is moments where things come straight out and our main character has to make a choice, a decision about whether to go along or speak out. But things happen in moments. Nothing is very deliberately explained to you or overly described or explained. And that's something that I really enjoy, the way that these little moments that seem so small and insignificant can show such a gruesome history and such a large part of the culture, and that kept part of the culture that kept things like this going, keeping silent and quiet, and the power and control that the Catholic Church had at the time that this is set, which I believe is the 1980s. It's a really short book, so there's not that much to say, but every sentence is important, every word is powerful, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of this. It's also set at Christmas time, as I said, so it is a good, easy Christmas read, if that's not something you're looking for in March, but maybe like make a note. Then we have The Wren by Anne Enright, who is another very famous Irish author. The Wren came out last year and is another story about mothers and daughters, which seems to be a common theme in some of these books. Is about a woman who has a daughter out of wedlock on her own. She raised this girl, and the girl is now in her 20s at university and is exploring herself and sex and love and relationships in a way that is kind of self-harming. There is a lot of lack of understanding of how to like stand up for herself and what can be expected and the things that she puts herself through. And then we also have the perspective of her mother, who is a really great character. Again, another person that reminded me of people of my mother's generation. Very forthright and funny, and so different than the mother we experience from the perspective of her daughter. We see her childhood, her teenagedom, her becoming a mother, her growing up, and how she became and got to the place that she is today. Her father was a famous poet, and he abandoned that family. And so a lot of the perspective, her perspective, is about how to love someone who has no care for you, and how to experience a relationship with someone who is famous and well known, and the world, or at least the country, loves them and has such fondness for them, but they are in their private life an uncaring person. And so it is that separation of the art and artist and the love of an artist, and how when they are a damaging person, how that love from the rest of the world affects your relationship with them. And her daughter's relationship with her grandfather is only through his poetry, and there are moments of his poetry in the book as well which are really, really beautifully written, and I really, really loved. I would say Anne Enright doesn't quite know how young people use the internet, and that was a little strange to read, a little strained in my reading, but overall I really loved the voices of the characters in this one. It's another one that had really strong voices and did a really great job of character development, bringing to life characters who feel real without needing to info dump or without needing huge amounts of description. They come to life through their voice and through the way that they talk, and I really enjoyed that. I have one non-fiction for you, and that is Don't Touch My Hair by Emma Dabiri. Emma Dabiri is an Irish-Nigerian woman, and this book is about anti-blackness, and she talks a little bit about her own experience growing up mixed race in Ireland in the 80s and 90s. but most of it is much more academic than that. And that was something that I really enjoyed about this book. It looks at topics of racism and misogynoir through the lens of hair. And it does so in a way that doesn't feel so much like baby's first book about this. Like, I think a lot of the most accessible stuff can feel a little too simplistic. But I felt like this one did a really good job of balancing both being welcoming and accessible with giving actual analysis and in-depth information. It covers topics such as like algorithms and mathematics and how that relates to braiding, and also the concept of time and the capitalist colonialist structure of days and weeks, and how those things are broken up, and the ways that black hair can introduce a different concept of time. It talks about the idea of good hair and colorism within the black community, and I think it is really well done. As I said, really accessible, really well written, but not afraid to go a little deeper and a little further than some of the other books on similar topics do. I think it complicates things and goes into nuances. It is not quite so black and white, for want of a better phrase. And then finally we have my honourable mention, and this is The Giant O'Brien by Hilary Mantel. Now, much like myself, Hilary Mantel was born and raised in England to Irish parents. And so whilst she is not Irish, she is Irish diaspora. And her book, The Giant O'Brien, is the book in which she deals with Irishness and its relationship with England the most clearly. This follows the story of a giant named O'Brien who lives in rural Ireland in it's either the 17th or the 18th century, I can't remember. And he is a storyteller, because all giants are storytellers, and we see the Ireland under colonial rule at that time. And then he travels to England in order to make his fortune as a giant, and becomes involved with the Irish community in London at the time, and we see the way that they were treated, this kind of underclass poverty and the abuse faced. But also, because he is a giant, he is treated as an oddity, and it goes into kind of the freak shows. But there is a Scottish surgeon who's is the other perspective we see in this novel, and he is obsessed with this giant, and he wants his body when he dies. He's like obsessed with it. And it is based on a true story of a very tall man from Ireland whose body was taken when he died and put up in a museum, and has only recently, I think, been released to Ireland. This novel has the signature kind of grit and physicality that happens in Mantel's writing, her description, the kind of the way her world is alive, the way she writes a room makes you feel like you are in that room, like no other writer that I know. And at the same time, it has the humour, it is very funny, but also it's the most sort of gossamer of the books of hers that I have read, the most intangible in some ways. So whilst you can feel like you are in a room, at the same time you never know whether that room is in a dream. It is really, really incredibly beautifully written, and because it is about the tradition of Irish oral storytelling, I think that is why you've got such a tone to it. I think it works really, really well. So whilst she may not be officially Irish, she probably was an Irish citizen, legally speaking. So I think it counts. Thank you for watching. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you have any favourites that I haven't mentioned, I'd love to hear from you. If you are new here, my name is Roisin, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.